Hello, I'm your host Atu Jamir and welcome to our talk show Unfiltered. Before we start with our talk show, let's have a look at the short video on what we're going to discuss about today. Urbanization, a process during which the industrial structure becomes increasingly oriented around secondary and the tertiary industries instead of primary industries. In this sense, urbanization also involves changes in the working population from agricultural to non-rural industrial and service occupations, as well as changes in the thinking patterns, lifestyle, behavior models, values and culture. Formation and development of cities in urban system of industrial countries are generally according to industrial development and follow united and moderate pattern. Nonetheless, in developing countries, not being in accordance with sustainable industrial and social development of these countries, increasing trend of urbanization has caused raft of environmental, economic and social problems. Paying careful attention to urban development principles and environmental concerns leads to a more sustainable development of urban development. Moreover, urbanization is directly affected by urban development trend of cities and could cause a lot of undesirable economic damage. In fact, high amount of policies leads to several needs such as educational facilities, transportation facilities, job, clean air, healthy, potable water. And as you have seen in the video, to talk about how urbanization has adversely affected the environment, the environmental challenges in our society and the role of citizens in building a city, we'll be joined by Mr. Tarachu Fithu, who is the Joint Director, Urban Development. Hi sir, thank you so much for joining us today. We understand that you're busy, but thank you so much for taking out time and joining us. Okay, so moving forward with this discussion here, since we're about to talk about how urbanization has adversely affected our environment, could you tell us how bad or good is Nagaland when it comes to urbanization? Since we are, mostly forest land, can we say that we are in trouble?
Well, thank you for welcoming me to the show.
Welcome, sir.
See, urbanization as such is not a matter of choice. The whole world as such is moving towards urbanization.
Right.
And statistics shows that even India will be 50% urbanized by another 20-30 years, and that's a lot of population. So even for Nagaland, we have no choice. People don't want to stay in the village. They're migrating from villages to the urban areas in search of maybe livelihood, in search of jobs, and educated people especially, they want to settle in the urban areas. So looking by that perspective and going by that perspective, probably even for Nagaland in the next 20 years, 30 years, we may be as high as 50% urbanized. And if you see the last two decades of census, during 2001, there were of course some lapses or some lacuna in the statistics, but urban areas shows that there was a jump, there was a decadal growth rate of 65%, and that is the highest in India. And even if you see 2011 census, again it was to the tune of 65% urban population growth, and that's that is again the highest in India. And in the same same decade, if you see the rural India, it was a rural Nagaland, it was a negative growth trend. That shows how how we're moving towards urbanization is not a matter of choice, but that is the way forward. So even the government of India had a policy to curb migration from rural to the urban areas, but they realized that it is not possible. So the best option is to channelize urbanization in a most favorable way, in a most smooth transition way, which will make our cities more efficient.
So you talked about transitioning in a smooth manner when it comes to urbanization. So could we say that Nagaland is also doing the same?
See, when it comes to Nagaland, we have lots of issues. We have to, adequately plan for the housing, for the migration.
Right.
We have to adequately plan for the infrastructures, the roads, for institutions. But then we have our own traditional system of traditional land holding system. That is where we face problem. Even if you find a location which is most ideal for a particular kind of infrastructure.
Right.
Because of the land ownership issue, we cannot find the ideal land in the ideal place. So these are the issues that we face, and that is why we are not able to implement the master plans. And so the transition from urban to rural now, as you can see, it is still haphazard. We have to say like that, because everything urbanization apart from the policy has to happen on land, and so our customary practices, land holding system, are sometimes a hindrance to a smooth plan, especially in the urban areas.
All right.
Yeah.
So as you have mentioned, you said that land holding or our customary practices are some of the hindrance when it comes to development also. So are there any other issues as such that should be addressed, sir?
Yeah, see, the issue of resources is very much availability of fund, and yes, we do have expertise and planners, but then I think in terms of technical manpower and expertise,
Right.
we still need to open up, and we still need to make opportunity for qualified planners. And also, not only that, you see, we also have to look for public participations. Without public participation, without community participation, especially in a context like Nagaland,
Yes,
where we are tribals in nature, where our customary practices are sometimes or many times in conflict with the law of the land.
Right.
What is enacted in the assembly is sometimes or many times in conflict with the traditional practices.
Right, sir.
So apart from many other things, community participation is definitely the way forward to a smooth transition and proper development of the state. Yeah.
So in that way, could you also tell us more about how can a community, we as a community, contribute to that, sir?
You see, we have to come to the reality that we have to be accommodative, because without land we cannot do anything.
Yes, sir.
So the government, as and when, as and where and when land is required for the public interest,
Right, sir.
that's what we should keep in mind. We have to always think of public interest, which is above our personal interest. Without personal sacrifice, public interest cannot be always addressed. So I think that is where community participation, and the community has to learn to be accommodative to the proposals of the government, and in doing so, in fact, it benefits a lot even to the public, because by bringing development works in an area, it actually unlocks
Right,
the
sir.
potential of the land, and it actually leads to land value appreciation, property appreciation. But many times we don't think in that way. We don't want the road to be constructed on our land, and we want to stop it and things like that. But actually, by bringing those things, we're actually enhancing and appreciating the value of our land.
Yes, sir. Also, moving forward with this discussion, so could we say that the lack of engineering tradition of town planning in the early stages is of Nagaland, that it's what affected the urban personality of the state we know now?
Yes, to a lot of extent, because the first master plan prepared for the state was Dimapur and Kohima, way back in 1974-75, but still we have not been able to implement the master plan. That's how our buildings, our developments are going haphazard in so many ways. So that is because we are not used to that kind of plan, and we are all by and large rural in nature. So the idea of those planning are not actually we're not used to that, we can say like that. So that is why planning and engineering and all those things were new. That's how we have not been able to implement those master plans.
Right. So are there any, we know that when it comes to urbanization there comes pollution as well, it goes hand in hand, we can say. So to combat pollution, one of the most important thing we do is we plant trees. I mean, afforestation is one of the thing, and green city as we call it. So are there any plans to increase green coverage to urban areas by your department, sir?
Like I've mentioned, because of the land holding system, it is very difficult to do the afforestation because the land belongs to the individual. But then there are government programs like under AMRUT. There is a mandatory provision of fund to take up parks. But unless we go to the place where the land is already acquired and belongs to the government, we cannot go and develop park anywhere,
Right.
which belongs to the individual. So we have taken up a couple of parks in the last 2-3 years, but then those are because of the lack of sufficient land, those are small scale, or we could not develop the way it should be. But then yes, we have some government programs to take up parks. Yeah.
Okay, so moving forward to as we talked about, like I said earlier, we have with urbanization comes other adverse effects to the environment as well. So could you please tell us about some of the effects that we should be looking forward to, or we should be taking care of, or give more importance on? For example, like waste management or pollution, or controlling pollution. Is there anything as such, sir?
Yes, in fact, along with urbanization comes many adverse effects, and to me, I feel that waste management is one of the biggest issues facing challenge in the urbanization process. So with urbanization, the task of waste management is also more complicated, and it is more so in the urban areas more than the rural areas. In the urban areas, because in the urban areas the nature of the pattern of consumption is much higher. That is how the waste per capita generated is also much higher, and so the challenge is much more in the urban areas rather than the rural areas. And there are more hazardous waste and industrial waste which pollutes our environment. So in a way, all these pollutions, all this urbanization, yes, along with pollution, have an impact in our environment and especially our health here. And so when we say it pollutes and impact on our environment, we mean to say that it is impacting our soil, our air, our water sources, whether it is surface water or whether it is groundwater. So that is how ultimately all these waste toxics reach back our food chain and could lead to serious health problems and issues like that. And so that is where, and not only that, it also creates a lot of unpleasant sight in our cities, in our roads, and in our environment. Foul smell, unpleasant smell, all those things are there. So I think it is very important that pollution has to be, and especially the waste management has to be handled in a scientific manner.
Right, sir. So also, so could you please tell us about some of the objectives of waste management?
Yeah, that's what I mean to say. See, we have it ultimately, if waste is not properly managed or properly handled, it is going to have ill effects on our health.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So what are the various laws and acts that related to waste management, sir?
Yes, there are many laws and acts, rules which were enacted because for the environment, for the pollution and all. And interestingly, when it comes to enacting the laws and acts and rules for environment and waste management, only the Union Parliament is the authority to make the laws and acts, and not the State Assembly. And it is so important. It is so because it is very important that states cannot afford to have different standards. Right. So we have basically maybe many laws, but out of many, 5-6 are the most crucial laws, like the Solid Waste Management Rules 2016, Plastic Waste Management Rule 2016, and just recently it was learned that it has been amended, and now it is amended 2022. And then we have Construction and Demolition Waste Rules, Construction and Demolition Waste Management Rules 2016. We have Biomedical Waste Management Rules 2016, Hazardous and Other Waste Management Rules 2016. We have E-Waste Management Rules, and we have Battery Waste Management and Handling Rules 2001. So out of many rules, out of many laws, these are the 6-7 main management rules which the Green Tribunal, National Green Tribunal, it is equivalent to a Supreme Court when it comes to the environment protection. So these are the 5, 6, 7 laws which the NGT is pursuing and focusing in a very serious manner and penalizing states which are not implementing and adopting these rules. And all these rules are basically enacted under the, we can say, the Principal Act, which is known as the Environment Protection Act 1986. So of course we cannot go into details of the provisions of all this act, but then just those are the few most important rules here.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think, sir, you mentioned about the very important aspects where we should be looking forward to, because I think waste management, when we see, is a major thing that plays a very major role in pollution, I think. So could you please tell us about some principles of waste management?
Yeah, okay. See, we cannot go into detailed discussions of the technology options and other things like that, but what is to me most important is, in our context, what is viable, what is doable by every citizen and the authorities. So in that context, you see, let us first go by like sources of waste. Okay, so the source of waste we are looking at from the urban point of view. The waste comes from residential areas, commercial areas, industrial areas, institutional areas like college, schools, churches, and construction and demolition sites. So all these waste are basically, you can categorize into two, which are biodegradable and non-biodegradable. And the wastes are normally like food waste, garden or yard waste, paper waste, soil papers, plastic waste, letters, metals, aerosol cans, and they can be categorized into like recyclable and non-recyclable. Biodegradable and non-biodegradable. So biodegradable are mostly, can be composted, and those are mostly wet waste, we call it, wet waste and dry waste. So wet wastes are basically biodegradable and can be composted. So normally they constitute about 45% of the total municipal waste that is generated. Then the dry waste normally are about 55%, and within dry waste again there are recyclable waste and non-recyclable waste, which are known as inerts or rejects that cannot be recycled. So the way it is treated, the way it is managed between the wet waste and dry waste, we can discuss that further later on. But the principles, as you ask, for any good best practices or good principle, we are all aware of the 3R.
Right. Reduce,
reuse, and recycle. So what can we reduce and how can we reduce? Reduce is like, in the first place, we can decline like plastic bags. We can also, decline disposable waste, single-use disposable waste. We can also avoid purchasing such waste, such kind of items which are single-use. Or we can even decline packagings, and we can even return packaging items. That way we can, in the first place, reduce our waste. And then coming to the second R, the reuse. What can we reuse? We can reuse like carry bags. We can reuse like packaging jars, boxes, bottles, and even single-use disposable items also we can reuse at our own personal level. That way we can at least, reuse some of the items. And when it comes to recycle, by what we mean, the concept of recycle is basically, while minimizing waste, we are also trying to recover commercially valuable materials such as plastic, metals, bottles, etc., and return it back to the consumption cycle. Yeah. So these are the 3 R's. Basically, these are the 3 principles. And in order to effectively implement this, especially reuse and recycling,
Right.
we have different steps, different approaches and process. Like the first thing is segregation of waste at source. We have to segregate our waste at source. If it is at home, we can segregate. If it is in the restaurant, also they should be made to segregate their waste. Wherever waste is generated, it has to be segregated at source. And when we say segregation at source, we mean to say wet waste and dry waste. So the wet waste should be normally kept in green bins, and the dry waste should be kept in blue bins. And if you see other advanced countries, they do have even 3-4 bins also. Hazardous waste could be different, plastic waste bins could be different, so it goes like that. So the first step is segregation of waste at source. Then second step is door-to-door collection. Door-to-door collection, if it is not enforced, if it is not implemented, then there's no point even collecting, segregating the waste at source. So the segregation of waste at source has to be done by the individuals concerned, and the door-to-door collection is the responsibility of the authorities, like town councils, municipal councils. They have to come collecting from door to door.
Right.
And of course, the idea concept of door to door in our context may be a little bit different, because being a hilly area, the vehicle collecting waste collection vehicles cannot reach all the buildings. So people, as responsible citizens, collecting the waste, coming up to the road and putting it in the collection vehicle is a good practice actually. So that is considered as door-to-door collection. Then from there it is transported to the processing or disposal site. So that is how, those are the few steps. That's how waste is segregated, collected, transferred and things like that. Then at the disposal site, there's how wet waste is separately treated and dry waste is separately managed. In fact, as when it comes to wet waste, it can be done very successfully even at our own household level as well.
Right.
There are, like you must be very much aware, you have pit composting. You dig a small pit, and those are very simple techniques. That's how we can do. Then pot composting. If you don't have a space for the pit, you can use it pot. You can even use a drum called drum composting. So those are very simple things. But but fortunately, in the context of Nagaland, except for maybe Kohima, Dimapur, most of such kind of wet waste, which are normally kitchen waste, are reprocessed and reused as animal feeds.
Yes.
And that is at the top of the preferred waste management in the pyramid of the waste management. That is the most preferred way of managing our wet waste.
Okay.
So that is how I think in Nagaland we are doing very well when it comes to wet waste, because we rear pigs and animals like that. So that is how the wet waste at the household level can be done, and it can be done at the colony or ward level also. And in the ward level, it cannot be pit composting. Of course, large pit composting is possible, but pot composting and drum composting are not recommended, because the quantity of the waste is going to be more. So here we use what is known as vermicomposting, or we can also use mechanized wet waste composters. Then at the city level, the third level, the highest level we use, it has to be windrow composting, or it has to be biomethanation process. That's how wet waste is taken care of at the household level, at the ward level, and at the city level. Then dry waste, like it's basically recycling. We segregate metals, plastics, boards, woodens, papers, and things like that. So how it is actually how it is done is, you might have heard of the Material Recovery Facility, MRF. It's called MRF.
Okay.
And incidentally, it was there in the news this morning, where our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi had mentioned about the importance of having an MRF in all the urban areas. So according to the news, there are 1,600 MRF in India since the last 5-6 years. So MRF is basically, a collection point, a sorting yard, you can call it also, where segregated waste will be brought there. Okay, and then in that, it is it doesn't require very big land also, and for a small state like Nagaland, where we have very small urban local bodies, it is very doable and it is very much required, because we cannot go for high-tech technologies and all, which are not viable because they are very costly, and they are also not viable because our waste is very less. So the best thing is recycling through this material recovery facility. So we take the segregated waste brought from the wards and colonies by the town councils or any authority, or even by the private parties, NGOs, or by the rag pickers, rag collectors. So they bring it there, and that is where they further segregate it to different. The dry waste is further segregated to different materials. So the design criteria is purely dependent on the population and the waste generated. So the population say up to 30,000-40,000, the waste generated will be hardly 7-8 tons. So the area required also will be hardly 3,000-4,000 square feet. So it's not very big, and the design is such that you just need to have an unloading space where the waste will be further segregated, and you will have 3-4 rooms where metals will be kept differently, different than cans, bottles, papers, like that. You keep it, in different rooms. Yeah, so it's very simple. And then you'll need to have a restroom. You'll need to have a small office maybe, and maybe washrooms and toilets and other utilities. And along with that, you can have since in our context, since it's very small, the ULPs are very small, the wastes are very less. What can be done is we don't need like conveyor belts and extrusion machines and all. We just need a shredder for the plastic, because plastic transportation is very tricky because it's very light. So you have to shred them and pack them.
Right.
And then also you need something called baling machine. Baling machine is where you can put different kind of PET bottles, and then say cans and all. You can cartoons and all. You can compact it and pack it and make the transportation more effective and cost effective. Yeah. So at the most you'll need a shredder. You'll need a compacting or baling machine, and with just 2-3 rooms, it works very well. And what could not be recovered, in other words, which cannot be recycled, not fit for recycle, those are known as inners or rejects, and only those materials should go to the landfill. Yeah. So in our context, the most important and the 2 things which are required, there's no option, are MRF, material recovery facility, and scientific landfill. And so earlier practices such that we don't segregate, we don't recover for recycling, so we just take the whole waste and dump it in our landfill. So the landfill, which is supposed to operate for 20 years, will get filled in 5-6 years. But if we recover all such materials and take only the inerts, which are rejects, then it can go for 20 years. That's how the whole principle of this waste management, from collection to the disposal take place.
So we have talked about waste segregation here. So we'd also want to know how is it when it comes to Nagaland as of now. Like, we just know that the waste that we get from home, it's taken and then it's dumped. So how is it segregated in those dumping disposal areas, or is it not segregated at all?
Now at the moment, we don't have many wards or many ULPs, urban local bodies, practicing that. Yes, we do, but then not in a very big way.
Right.
The best example we can say is Chumukedima. We have a material recovery facility which is constructed there and doing very well. So I think the best example is in Chumukedima. We have one. Yes.
So do we have enough? Do we have the proper machineries to dispose waste, or do we still lag behind when it comes to reduce recycling and all when it comes to waste disposal?
As I've mentioned, the segregation, the onus of the responsibility for segregation lies with the waste producer or waste generator, that is every household, every institution. Now the responsibility to transport from there, to collect and transport from there, is the authority, the urban local bodies basically. So right now, I think more or less, as far as transportation vehicle is concerned, every ULP have been, the government has given vehicle to every ULP. But then, yes, when it comes to, further segregation,
disposing
and the scientific disposal is yet to take place. And that way, at least to the 12 earlier district headquarters, we have already initiated to start the material recovery facility. Then we have 39 ULPs, urban local bodies. So let's see, maybe over a period of time, we should be able to extend facilities even to all the other ULPs as well.
So I would want to know if there is any possibility where we can make waste to wealth, like is there any way as such?
Yeah, actually there are many models and many plans which are running on that model. In fact, except for the last that rejects, which we call it inerts or reject, the last 20%, which goes to the landfill, the rest 80% actually has got, it has got a value which can be, can be a profitable venture. And so there are many such kind of plants which are operating where waste is, on the principle of waste to wealth. In fact, even just converting the wet waste to compost itself is wealth, right? So the government of India, to encourage that kind of process, that kind of activity, has even come up with subsidy of giving rupees 1,500 per ton, and encouraging the fertilizer companies to buy from the local bodies in India. And that is wet waste. Then we have this waste to energy, but of course it's not feasible in our context here because it requires a lot of waste, and also it requires waste which are having high calorific value. So that way the waste are burnt and then generated and generate electricity. And Government of India has assured for all such kind of plants that they will purchase they will purchase 100% of the power produced from such plants. And of course we do have this, may not be very relevant for us, but construction and demolition waste is also there. In large cities here, because of ours is in the hill areas, construction and demolition waste are not much of an issue because we use it for filling landfills and all. But in the other areas, in other ULPs, in other parts of India, they have a real big problem with this construction and demolition waste. So nowadays they have set up plant to even recycle all those waste and recover the materials and use it for various kind of construction. Like they can use it for concrete bricks, paver stones, or they can even use it for like sub base for road construction, and non-structural construction like plain cement concrete for pedestrian walkways and footpaths like that. So that is how even the construction and demolition waste are also recovered and used, which generates wealth actually. And so also is, we think of plastic like is a nuisance. It's one of the most serious, we can say, waste material, but then it can also be used to generate wealth. How the government of India has issued strict instruction that for cities with population more than 5 lakhs should use plastic for construction of road along with bitumen mix. And it seems that the strength of the road also increases. And however, the most important is that it gives better resistance to water and water stagnation. And it seems that it is cheaper for a standard road maybe, it is cheaper by 40 to 50,000 per kilometer. Yeah.
Alright.
So yeah, those are some of the ways in which waste are used for wealth creation.
Alright. So thank you so much, sir, for sharing us about how to generate waste, make waste to wealth. I think we have a lot more to learn about waste management. So we'd want to know about what is the scenario in Nagaland in respect when it comes to waste management.
I can say a little bit about urban areas.
Yes, sir, please.
But as I mentioned earlier, the issue is more complicated and more serious in the urban areas, because if you see the waste generation per capita, urban is somewhere from 300 grams per day per person to as much as 500 grams per day per person. And in developed countries, it is even as much as 1 kilogram. Yeah, the average per capita waste generated. So even in Nagaland, definitely the urban areas will be generating more waste as compared to the rural areas. And in rural areas, I believe, except for plastic waste, I think we don't have to teach them what is reuse, what is recycling. I think they're doing enough. So it is the urban areas that is a cause for concern. So in the urban areas, we have, as far as our department is concerned, we have 39 urban local bodies, municipal and town councils. And as per our statistics collected from the local bodies, it's about 320 metric tons per day, the total waste generated in these 39 ULPs. And unfortunately, we don't have plants for processing except in Kohima. But for the moment, even Kohima plant is also not operational for various reasons. So, and yeah, the one fortunate thing is, like as I mentioned earlier, even in the urban areas except for Kohima, Dimapur, most of the people rear pigs. So that is how wet waste is ultimately taken care of. That means we have already taken care of 45% of the waste, that is wet waste, reprocessed and used as animal feeds. So otherwise, it is like not very difficult to take care of the remaining dry waste. But of course, we have our own challenges, because it requires resources. It requires suitable land. It requires technical expertise, and it requires a lot of awareness among the masses. No matter what the authority does with good intention, unless the wastes are segregated, it becomes very difficult. Of course, after taking to the sorting yard, it can be segregated, but then it becomes very difficult, and most of the recyclable items also get spoiled or soiled. So we have our own challenges in that way, though the waste is not much, but then we have our own difficulties like that. Otherwise, in most of the cities in other parts of India, they are mostly managed by the private parties on a PPP mode, private public partnership mode. And the government has to give them land on lease, give them permission to operate, and give them the tipping fee. Basically, it's like a subsidy to them per ton. Amounts are worked out, and that is how private parties run the waste management plans. And the private party will come with all the technology, the fund, the manpower, and they run it for 20-30 years as per the agreement. So that is how in most cities in India they do in that manner. But in our context, since the wastes are too small, we cannot have that kind of partnership for it's not viable to have that kind of partnership here.
Right. So as you've mentioned, we can say that when it comes to educating the rural people in the rural areas about waste management, I think you could say that the government and also NGOs could do much more. Is it, sir?
Yes, in fact, a lot of all this success depends on the awareness of the public, their participation. Yeah. So yes, I believe the concerned departments are doing in the rural areas as part of the awareness campaign, like how we're doing in the urban areas.
Right.
Under different programs we're also doing through the urban local bodies. Yes, we are trying to reach out to the create awareness among the citizens. Yeah.
Also, sir, what is the way forward from this when it comes to waste management, and also us as citizens, what roles can we play in managing or balancing between urbanization and also taking care of the environment? What role do we play as citizens?
Yeah. Well, I'll just point out few
Right, sir.
aspects which are doable, which are achievable. Yeah. And let me just say what citizens can do, what citizens should do, and what authorities can do, or should do. So as we have mentioned about the principles of waste practices, the citizens should reduce their waste, give sincere effort to reduce their waste, give sincere effort for reuse, and also segregate their waste at source. This will save a lot of resources for the urban local bodies, and they can also practice the home composting, which will also save a lot of transportation cost for the urban local bodies. And citizens, I believe, simple things which they can do can really make a change. Like they can carry their own shopping bags to the markets. Yeah. Then they can carry their own water bottles to their working places. If they avoid throwing garbages, plastics on the roads and drains, that will really make our place much more cleaner. And most importantly, nothing comes free, so they have to pay for the services, because the urban local bodies are collecting the waste, transporting the waste, and trying to process it. So nothing comes free. You have to, as citizens, as responsible citizens, we have to learn to pay for the services provided, because the system has to be self-sustainable. See, whatever the salary, whatever the fuel charges, vehicle maintenances should be generated from that activity. Yeah. So in order to make it a sustainable activity, we have to, as citizens, we should learn to pay for the service. Yeah. And for the government, for the authorities, for the urban local bodies, it is their responsibility to see that door-to-door collection is done. Transportation is their responsibility. They have to have a suitable land acquired, and two things that cannot be done without are the material recovery facility and scientific landfill area. Yeah. So without doing these things, it will be incomplete. So these are the two things that they have to do. And then in addition to that, of course, they have to come up with, like we were discussing, extensive awareness campaign in the workplaces, in the offices, in the churches, schools, colleges, give training to the NGOs, self-help groups, and including like unions, like transport operators, like minibuses, autos, taxis. Because if you travel along the highway, you see people throwing out their bottles, water bottles from the taxi windows and things like that, which are just not acceptable. Yeah. So I think these are the few things that the government and the public have to work together.
All right, thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. It was quite an educative session, I should say, and I'm pretty sure that our viewers are now more aware and more educated about how to segregate waste, and also we got to know about how important it is to segregate waste. And also, as I've mentioned, there are also other adverse effects that to urbanization, and it's just not waste management, but there are other several aspects which we'll be covering in our next talk shows as well. But as of now, I'm pretty aware, I'm pretty sure that our viewers are now more educated about how to manage waste and got to learn more about waste management. So thank you so much once again, sir, for joining us today. Thank you. That's all we have for this episode of Unfiltered. Keep watching Hornbill TV.